Hey everybody, it's Dan Morey with Staffing Monthly, the industry's only digital magazine that focuses on bringing you the actionable insights for recruiting and sales and marketing, leadership, and we interview the industry's premier thought leaders to give you those actionable tidbits. And today is no different. I actually have Amy Yackowski on today talking about something that is a bit contrarian to what you normally hear me talk about, and that's metrics and KPIs. Now, while we drive to the same end result, we actually have two different paths for getting there. And if you don't know who Amy is, I'm surprised because she is actually very visible and all over LinkedIn, but she's with Painted Porch Strategies and she focuses on change readiness and helping organizations and people really identify areas of improvement, but more importantly, help them actually be ready to implement, adopt, and utilize those implementations to get better. She's also the co-host of Staffing Mania with the Staffing Shark. And obviously, he is somebody that you see on this program quite regularly and is sponsoring our It's 5 o'clock here mixer at the Staffing Sales Summit. So what I love about this is there's probably going to be very few edits because she's also the president of her local Toastmasters. So there's going to be no ums or ahs or any of those things that we say. So it's going to make post-production super easy. Amy, great to have you here. Great
Sure,
to connect
man.
with you. And I'm excited to talk about metrics and KPIs today.
Thank you, Dan, for having me. No pressure at all. I hope no one is going to be my counter for the day. Toastmasters. While I am the president, I am also a client. And I am continually learning and growing in that regard. So hopefully my ums, ahs, so's, and you knows will be pretty low. But please don't add any demerits to the end of our session today if a few creep out.
I'm pretty sure I've at least got four already if I'm counting in my own head. So
I am thrilled to be here. Thank you.
that's awesome. I'm excited about this because I love metrics, KPIs. I like data. I like making informed decisions, really. I think that's what it comes down
Hmm.
to. And I had done a post on LinkedIn talking about really my staffing dashboard, the tool that I've built over the years that has very traditional inputs, very fundamental data, in my opinion, very fundamental data that comes out of software. And you made some comments that I thought were fascinating. And you were talking about not solely relying on things like number of calls and number of client meetings or headcount and things like that, the traditional kind of tangible metrics, but you like to look at signals, things like candidate engagement and things that are a little bit, in my opinion, less tangible, a little harder to measure, but worth the effort, it seems like. So I want you to talk about that. So talk to me really about what are these signals that you're looking at to measure the health of a business and knowing if you're on track to hit your goals for the year.
Yeah. Well, first off, I always love poking a bear, so that's kind of my number one. If someone's going left, I'm going right. That's why I started Painted Porch to begin with. I felt that there was this big gap in the industry, and I was like, I'm just going to try something, to quote Monty Python, something completely different. And when it comes to metrics, I think there's a lot of value. I said that to you before. There's a lot of value in what are otherwise kind of the standard boilerplate metrics, KPIs that you have, number of calls, fill ratios, head count, et cetera, time to X, right? Those are all really good metrics to measure because they can be indicators of course corrections that you might need to make for the next go around. But from my perspective, they are very much lookbacks to a certain degree. They are what has already happened, not as much of a predictor of what happens next. And I just feel that we need to broaden our scope just a little bit wider. I'm not saying completely change where you're looking, just broaden the aperture, the scope of the lens that you're looking through to include some of these additional metrics that you're right, might otherwise be a little bit less traditional. They might even be a little bit harder to track, but if you do them, they can really help shine a light and maybe even make you a little bit of a psychic or a Nostradamus or a Rasputin, if you will, to be able to predict what might happen next. Those inputs like number of calls, those are great to measure whether someone is doing the reps. right? But if you think about it, for example, from the gym, I could go in and do 100 reps of bicep curls, but if I'm only doing it with a 1 pound weight, I'm not really going to get very big muscles. I'm not going to bulk up like Rick is, like the staffing shark. He would probably recommend a whole different fitness regimen in that regard. And so there's some of these metrics that I really look at that are more, how are you connecting? What type of connections are you making? What are you receiving back versus simply what are you putting out there?
So I do love that, and I think even with a 1 pound weight, you're going to hit atrophy pretty quickly. I don't know, 100 reps even with 1 pound weight sounds like a painful morning. Um,
Yeah.
so how do you how do you measure some of those things in sort of a standardized way? Because like as I'm hearing you talk, like I definitely see the value of it,
Yeah.
but I'm really like thinking about large data sets to and to make, kind of non-biased decisions. Like
Yeah.
how do you consistently measure some of these less tangible ones? Like, and I'm gonna go into the one
Yeah.
like candidate satisfaction. Are you using like NPS scores? Like, how are you actually measuring this? And then let's talk about like how do you apply that to evaluating something that's predictive?
Yeah. So that's a great example. So candidate satisfaction. It can be something as simple as an NPS. That is certainly one way to get it quick and frequent. So that way you're starting to see, okay, how was it for this stage of our engagement? Not once the assignment is over, not after you've hit a certain number of months. For example, in the healthcare industry, where Joint Commission is expecting some sort of assessment to come out of it. But how often are you checking in on how it's going for the individual? Especially my background is in healthcare staffing, and good Lord, God bless those candidates that are working with these staffing firms and also these recruiters who are working with these candidates. There was a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of conversation. There's a heck of a lot of documentation. They're probably talking to 5 or 6 different people within the staffing firm. And at any given time, we're so focused on getting to that end, hitting that KPI, hitting that submission number, hitting that approval number, hitting that offer number, hitting that placement number, that sometimes we lose sight of, hey, how's it going? How are you feeling? Because a measure like that can be something simple like an NPS, or it could literally just be a conversation that you have where within your solution, you capture some sort of result. You could capture it through a tag of some sort, through a particular note type that you're capturing. Maybe it has a certain identifier on it. Those are small things that you can do. And through that, you will be able to better predict, are they going to stick around? Are they going to complete those 75 documents that you asked them to complete? Who, maybe, how are they feeling in this moment? What's the probability of them actually accepting the offer and then showing up to the assignment? These small things that, while a little bit qualitative, it is a little bit more conversationally driven. You can find very simple ways. You don't have to over architect it. You can find very simple ways to catch those problems before all of a sudden it becomes a problem later on. And you're like, what happened? I don't even know.
So that makes a ton of sense to me, and it does. I can see the correlation to being predictive. So if you were gonna just high overview here, you don't got to get super nuanced with this. If you were gonna say, hey, these are the checkpoints, like these are the parts of the process where I'm gonna do that check-in, and
Hmm.
then kind of break that down for me, and then where I want to go next is like how are you recording that? Like how, because you do have to standardize it into some measurement, whether like even on an MPS is like a 0 through 10 scale, right? Or 1 through 10
Hmm.
scale.
Yeah.
Like what are the points, the checkpoints that you're actually checking in to be able to predict the next part of the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll look at it again through maybe a little bit of a healthcare lens, but it does apply. The staffing process in and of itself is pretty standard from start to finish.
Yeah.
So I think one of the first times to do it is at time of application, or as soon as their application has been accepted or has been submitted. I think it can be an easy ask. And whether or not you do it as an NPS, there's different schools of thought and different psychological thought leaders who say sometimes a Likert score isn't quite going to give you, or Likert scale isn't quite going to give you what you're looking for,
Right.
that maybe you ask it more as open-ended. We have some amazing tools out there now with AI that can actually understand and interpret with a little bit of guidance what the hidden message might be within the response. So I would say it starts at very first interaction. Hey, how did this go? How would you rate it? You know, whether it's a 1 to 10, or how do you feel this went? What were the things that you enjoyed? What are the things maybe that you still have questions on? Very easy. And then after that, it's all of the core checkpoints. If I were to think about it, because I have a business process background, if I were going to think like the core 9 business processes, there's, we're talking about it on the client side, there's the first point of engagement when you're trying to do new business development. You're outreaching to someone. How did it go? What are your immediate reflections? And then you move on to the next stage, which is the opportunity stage. And then you talk about the negotiation and proposal stage, and then the contract stage, and then the close stage, and then the onboarding stage for the client, right? All of these different pieces. You don't have to go crazy. You could very much narrow it and just pick a couple checkpoints. But and through the systems that we have today, this is something that you could easily automate as well. Just by hitting a button, setting a status, taking an action, it can immediately send it out and ask it in a non-bias way where it's not necessarily a conversation if you want to eliminate maybe someone who is softening the message because of the person on the other end.
Mm. And you said there's many tools. Is there a tool that you're used to or that you would recommend to help out with this?
Not really. To be completely frank, there are so many out there. It's like pick the one that speaks the most to you.
Okay.
You could use something like a Survey Monkey. You could develop your own survey tool. There's Typeform or Typeshare, there's Sense, there's Work Llama, there's all of these different tools that you can use. And even within your own ATS or CRM itself, they also have workflow automations that you can build in. So it really just depends on what technology you have, and never someone to say, go buy new tech. Let's start by looking at the technology that you have and see if we can just leverage it a little bit more. But if
Yeah.
you don't have that technology, then it can just be literally asking the question, having the conversation, and not using tech to hide behind and say, well, we don't have that, so we can't do this.
Okay. So smart. I do appreciate you saying, hey, don't go buy something new. Like, look at what you do have. I think that's actually I guess a shortcoming of our industry. We tend to look externally to buy the new shiny object without looking at the capabilities of what we currently have. So I want to get to a point to where I truly understand, because I'm fascinated by this. I don't fully understand the model, and I want to. And I know
Yeah,
we're not going to
sure.
get that all in 20 minutes, but um, when I think about this, if you're going to be able to predict something or even make a change and say, hey, you need to get to a benchmark. So there needs to be some level of
Hmm.
standardization. So are you essentially, when you do these, qualitative surveys where you're asking for subjective answers, how are you actually translating that into some sort of 1 to 10 or a number or a sentiment, score? Like how do you recommend doing that so we can actually create a benchmark so we know, hey, if we're here, we're likely to fill these jobs on time. But if we fall below it, then we're running risk of not filling these jobs on time. Like how do you get to
Yeah.
that level to where you create a good benchmark?
Well, okay, I just said don't use tech, but I'm going to say use tech for this instance because
All
this
right.
is where tech can be applied. So for example, for me, I use Claude. Claude is an AI LLM. It's like ChatGPT. It's just different, right? Again, everybody has their own
That's right.
version of it. But within Claude, you can work with the tool to help design the questions. And then from there, predefine what your otherwise Likert score might be under the hood and say, if they answer in this way, this presumes, or this can help in this we can assume to a certain extent is a signal that it's a 1. versus a 2. So you can go in and predefine, like if answers tend to include these types of words or have this type of tone, this is usually where within the range it might fall. So that way you can then take that, stir it in a pot and have it spit out and say, okay, based on these responses, here's how we're thinking. Not so much to then say on a 1 to 10 scale, but this is maybe satisfied, at risk, needs work, needs attention, requires follow-up, etc.
Okay. So you are using some sort in this scenario that like an AI analysis to say, hey, take the words that the person is saying and sort of
Yeah.
baseline it against what we know, what we've identified, and then create some sort of score for us. So we create a benchmark. Okay.
Right.
And
Exactly. And now that it is not, I picked 10, so now I know that number. And because we can get caught up in that of having a little bit of rigidity with the quantitative data or the quantitative results, but the quantitative results don't always tell, right, the full story, especially psychologically, right? People tend to, like if you ask someone to rate something, it's probably somewhere between like 7 and 8.5 normally. Like if it's like, oh, it's not bad, but it's not great, but I don't want to say it's terrible, so I'm going to say it's like a 7,
right.
right? As opposed to having it open-ended, having their words, and then being able to use those words and look at them over time to set some benchmarks and say, if we took that data, it does take time. It's not something that you can implement tomorrow and immediately start predicting the future in a week, right? It is going to take time because it's informed over time, and you're going to start to identify patterns within the behaviors of those more quantitative KPIs within your business.
Yeah.
So we can start to correlate these things that we otherwise would have looked in isolation. So, based on time to respond, and then time to qualify, and then time to accept, over time, we can say, if we take all of those numbers and then look at the number of placements, we can then start to see, okay, there is some patterning that's happening here. Now let's take and look at what their responses were to some of those checkpoints, those times where we checked in with them at each of those key kind of make or break periods within the staffing process. Did they stay or did they go? Did they say yes? Did they say no? At those different places. And over time, we can start to say, okay, we know that because they responded this way, the probability of them accepting the offer, the probability of them submitting all of their credentials in time, of starting when we agreed, et cetera, we can better predict that long term.
So that's fascinating to me. So let's the next thing, because obviously it's one thing to predict it, but if you predict that it's not going to hit your success metric, if you're like, hey, we drop below a prediction of 80% fill or 80% acceptance rate
Mm-hmm.
of a role, what are some of the things you do? Like how do you look at that data to say, okay, we need to make these changes, right? Being a change readiness expert, like
Yep.
how do you identify what needs to change and then systematically, or I guess just appropriately, implement them to actually get your predictive index back to where it needs to be?
Yeah. So to that end, I will say that the short answer is we have a conversation. Because I always like to joke when it comes to KPIs, I love them as much as anyone else. And I think that they are a great thing that we can hide behind or we can use as a rationalization for why things are going great or things are not going so great. But at the end of the day, everybody goes home to their spouse or at happy hour and they complain about the things that they keep seeing happen over and over again.
Yeah.
They bring those frustrations forward. So we can use the data to signal a conversation is needed, or we need to change this, we need to make an adjustment. But some of the best ways that you're going to come up with the solutions to do what's next is to just get everybody in a room and start having some uncomfortable conversations because they're going to call it out.
So
They know. We
so
have
I
our
agree with that.
intuition. Yeah, our intuition is not our sole compass, right? It's not our sole thing that points us in what direction. We have data to help inform and to maybe get rid of the otherwise presumptions, bias, prejudgments, etc. But if you get people in a room you will start to even have patterns over time with what they start to say they're seeing happen. The either where they're the pool, where, where the talent is coming from, how long it's taking this or that to respond. They're going to have their answers.
And so I definitely agree with that. I mean, the frontline producers, they're seeing it every day. I think for me, the one piece I always try to caution against is the anecdotal, right? Because as
Yes.
humans, we're moody, right? Like we could have one person today put us on blast and complain about one thing. And then we
Yeah.
might take that into the end of day meeting in the huddle and be like, this is what I'm hearing. Like I'm hearing that people are
Yeah.
complaining about this thing and it's a data point of one, so like
Right.
that's where I like if you're feeding this contextual content into some sort of AI or some sort of machine that can measure sentiment and it spits out, hey,
Mm-hmm.
this is it. But if you could actually kind of do a root cause and say, hey, how many times are we actually hearing this complaint? Right? Because I
Right.
think that's when it becomes actionable, right? And
Yes.
that I think for me, just hearing you talk, I feel like being able to capture the content like that contextual content in a way gives you good data to do root cause analysis to know, is this something we
Mm-hmm.
should take action on, or is this just like two people complain about this one thing because like our online application happened to be down for the day, right? Like,
Right.
you know,
Yeah. And that's where, if you can create the marriage between the qualitative and the quantitative, you will have a much richer story and a much more well-informed perspective to tell than simply, here's the number. Why didn't why is the number the way it is? And then lean on anecdote or pure perception, as opposed to having some additional measures that you can look to, whether it's through some sort of survey tool and the results that you have captured there, some sort of rating, things like Great Recruiters, and those type of tools, or if you just have simply a way to capture the sentiment in your ATS, like I said, as simple as a note type. It doesn't, don't over architect it.
yeah.
And then over time, you can run based on that note type. And then you can start making those correlations. You can say, okay, is it a certain type of candidate? Is it a certain demographic? Is it a time of year? Is it this particular client? What are all of these components that are helping tell a more rich story about what is or isn't happening, what's working or what's not working, whether we're meeting or missing our marks within our business?
And do you track these to the producer level? So like you're actually looking at all of this sentiment and you're tying it to maybe to a specific account manager or recruiter so you can see like, hey, our benchmark is here and most of the team is hitting it, but we've got this one person that they see like do you tie it to that level or do you focus on anonymity?
I think you can do both. I think it depends on the culture of the organization and how they view performance. If performance is individual or if it's team based, I think that depends on to what depth or degree they're going to measure that. So yeah, that's
Okay.
my short answer. I think it it depends on how you want to run your business.
Okay. I agree with that. I'm a performance, like I prefer a meritocracy. I like people that actually want
Hmm.
to watch game tape and know how they're doing. And
Yeah.
so I do like people that actually appreciate being able to see areas where they can improve, or maybe they're not hitting the mark on an individual level. But I have seen organizations that they're not built that way. The culture,
Hmm.
for whatever reason. One last question I want to ask.
Okay.
You've been in staffing a long time with a focus in healthcare. You obviously care about data, metrics, KPIs, making informed decisions. So, what is your favorite KPI as it relates to healthcare staffing organizations? If you were going to tell a healthcare staffing
Ooh,
owner, leader, whatever it is, hey, this is one KPI that you should be focused on in 2025, what would that be for you?
man, that's a great one. I
Yes.
will say, okay, it's going to be slightly biased. Don't put a metric against this. It's going to be slightly biased. I will say organizational health. I think that is the one, and it has nothing to do with the outputs per se, like the firm hard outputs that you might be seeing within the day-to-day activities within an organization. But organizational health, in my opinion, is the single biggest predictor of how successful your entire staffing firm is going to do in its ability to grow, pivot, adapt, and thrive.
Wow. That I feel like I might have opened up Pandora's box with this one, but I'm going to ask a follow-on question.
Yes, yes.
How do you measure, how do you, and I'm not saying how do you generally, like, how does Amy measure organizational health in a staffing agency?
You just set me up perfectly for a sales pitch here, Dan.
I didn't even know that. Like, I'm genuinely
Yeah.
curious. Like, I agree that organizational health is a pretty strong indicator for the success of that organization. So I believe you. And I have
Mhm.
done a lot of research on this, and there are a lot of ways to measure this.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
so I'm just curious what you, being a bit of an expert in this area, what you recommend. So yeah, let's hear it.
So at the Painted Porch, we measure organizational health through a combination of an assessment, through interviews and observations, and then analysis of those numbers, right? Those KPIs, the finances and the activity and the performance to determine how ready, how capable, how adaptable, how nimble an organization is, and how willing their employees are willing to go along for the ride. Yeah. So we have a pretty comprehensive audit and assessment that we do to help identify this. Not everybody agrees with the results, and that's perfectly okay.
Oh,
It's
I
not
imagine not.
expected.
I imagine those are some pretty tough
Yes,
boardroom conversations.
it can sting a little bit sometimes when that information's there, but it's all in the intention and the drive to set them up for long-term success versus just continual, I'll say, hamster wheel reaction and survival.
Which plagues a lot of us. Wow. So I'm gonna stop there with a TB continued because I feel like we need to have a follow-up conversation just on that topic alone of just assessing the organizational health, and digging into it and things that you can do to make sure you have a healthy organization. So let's put a pin in that and revisit that because like
All
I
right.
I would be fascinated to discuss that with you as well.
Yeah. If I could give like a second, so that's my top one, right? But
Okay. All right.
I
All right.
think
Yeah.
that I'll give one more that maybe is more in the spirit of what we're talking about today, and I think it's the cost of vacancy. I think that's the big one,
There you
and
go. You can put a metric on this. Cost of vacancy.
yeah,
You're speaking my
yeah.
language. Keep
Yeah,
preaching
cost to
here.
vacancy. I think that that's one of the biggest ones that can help organizations better set themselves up to be strategic partners with their clients as opposed to just order takers in the business. If they really want to stand out and be seen differently than the hundreds or sometimes thousands of other staffing firms that are competing for the same business, I think if you can really focus on cost of vacancy at across all of the realms of it, what is it really costing you and what is it costing us to have this job not filled, but also to have it been presented to us. So how would I say last minute, so I think cost of vacancy is a big one. I
I,
think that one can set you up to be a real key trusted advisor and partner with your clients.
how do you what questions do you ask the client to get them to give you the information you need to really measure cost of vacancy? Because I feel like the client's always guarded. It's like what, like how
Yeah.
do you get that information out of the client?
Small breadcrumbs. No, it's like eating an elephant, right? Like small bites at a time. No, I think from this, you have to, number one, establish that level of trust. Now, granted, you might not be viewed as a trusted partner, but say, I want to help you not have to constantly do this lather, rinse, repeat dance that we're doing, this little circus that we're doing every week or every month. So if you're willing to have me partner with you, if you're willing to have me help you with this and giving me some of this data, we can possibly put together a more predictive, proactive plan. So that way we're not reacting so much in the moment and you are empowered to be successful as a staffing manager or hiring manager at your business.
I like it.
Yeah.
Amy, I appreciate you sharing your experience and wisdom of a couple decades in the industry with me and our followers today. If anybody out there wants to get a hold of you and learn more about kind of your predictive measures or change readiness, or I guess maybe even digging into how to get through cost of vacancy, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
So they can reach out to me directly at Amy at paintedporchstrategies.com. You can message me or DM me on LinkedIn. You can also tune in on Fridays with myself and the staffing shark, Rick Rosner, where we're always talking about this crazy stuff and challenging the status quo and sometimes trying to poke holes in otherwise standard ways of this is how it is thinking. So that's always a fun conversation. But yes, if you ever want to find more, I'm happy to sit down and give you like the actual, here's the 5 different data points that you would want to look at within your ATS if you're tracking it or not. But then also here's some additional things you can start to implement.
Love it. Love it. I appreciate that. I will get all that information on page so people can connect with you quickly and easily. And again, thank you for sharing your wisdom and experience with us today.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure.